Been testing out the A7s III for a couple of days now out here. And I have to say, this camera has truly blown my mind. All right, we need to talk about this camera because it is incredible. I think for the first time, this camera is something that I use that basically has no limitations in the way that I want to use it. It doesn't limit me at all. No matter what kind of shooting environment I'm in and what kind of shooting I want to do, this thing can do it. To start off with, this is not going to be a super specs heavy review. I think that's been done plenty of times. Gerald Undone probably has the best tech specifications video about this camera of anybody out there. So if you want to see more about that, I'll link his video in the description. But this is going to be more what this camera is like to use as a solo run and gun shooter who's just out on the move, shooting as I go, and how amazing this camera is to use in that sort of use case scenario. Along that line, if you don't know me, my name is Jake and I create content for solo creators on the go. People like me on the go, creating commercial projects, stuff for YouTube. And so I test and review equipment here in Alaska and do tips and tutorials on how to use that equipment so that you can tell better stories and make smart decisions when you go to purchase new gear. Also, I will be doing a setup video about my settings and my setup for this camera that'll be coming shortly, plus some other more deep dive reviews about it. So if that's something that interests you or that's something that you want to see more of, then definitely subscribe and stay tuned to the channel because there's lots more coming. To start off with, we're going to talk about the good things of this camera because there is a lot of good things. I feel like Sony has basically just listened to their user base for the last 5 years and thrown everything that they've heard as feedback from us, or the users, and put it into this camera. But there are a couple of things that I don't like about this camera. Certainly by no means is it a deal breaker, but there are two things actually that drive me kind of crazy about this camera. But those two things aside, this thing is a phenomenal camera to use for running gun shooters, for people who are out there just on the go, creating content, filming themselves or filming other people. Like this thing, it'd be fantastic for creating documentary series if you're traveling a lot because it's such a small form factor and it is so capable for a camera. Sony's made some changes to the body and the ergonomics, which I find, because I'm 6'4" and I've got bigger hands, I find it much more comfortable to hold for long periods of time, and just the access to all the buttons and the feel of all the buttons is much nicer than the A7 III, which is what I'm filming this on now. The flip out screen is fantastic. It is so nice to have a flip out screen, a variable angle screen, and be able to flip it around and kind of get it into whatever position you need it to get into. There are a couple of little quirks about it, but overall it's absolutely fantastic. And the quality of the screen, the quality of the EVF is phenomenal. It's so much better than the A7 III. On the body side, you have this full-size HDMI out, which is fantastic. And then my favorite thing is that Sony basically broke everything down into small doors here on the side. So you have your microphone jack here on the top side, which is the only thing you really need to open if you're going to be running around with a small microphone on the top. It's nice because that's it. It does not block the screen at all. You can still flip and rotate the screen and turn it without any blockage there whatsoever. Now, if you're going to use the headphone jack, there's a tiny bit of blockage, but really it's not that much because actually you can still see a majority of the screen there. And then you go to the USB ports here on the side. Now, the USB ports I didn't think would be that big a deal, except for the fact that the USB-C has power delivery, which means you can run this camera basically nonstop using a USB power bank or a USB power delivery power supply, and not have to worry about battery power at all, which is phenomenal if you're filming interviews and stuff like that. But the other thing about this is that it recharges the battery, or charges the battery in here so much faster than the original trickle charges that were in the A7 III and basically every other Sony camera. You can fully charge this battery in about the same amount of time it takes to fully charge a battery on the wall mount charger that you can buy from Sony, which you get a wall mount charger with this camera in the case. That is fantastic. Thank you, Sony. And overall, having these little flip out doors as opposed to the dangly things that have been on Sony cameras for a long time is a very welcomed improvement. My one little nitpick about this is that when you plug the full-size HDMI in here and you have this door here, it does cut in front of the screen, but if you have a really thin HDMI cable, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Moving on to the card slot side, it's easy. You pull the button down, pull the flap back, and it pops open right away, and you have slot 1, slot 2, which I'm glad they switched those around. I'm not going to say much about this other than you can use an SD card slot or the new CF Express Type A. I went ahead and got 2 CF Express Type A cards, and holy cow, they are so fast for offloading footage. You can use V90 SD cards, Type 2 SD cards, and they will work for almost every mode in this camera except I think S and Q mode at the higher frame rate settings, like 120 in 4K or 240 in HD, but I think pretty much every other mode counts on that. And then real quickly on the top, the fact that you now have a locking exposure dial so that you don't accidentally overexpose or underexpose because you've bumped this dial is fantastic. And then of course being able to switch between 3 user presets here, having your video modes and your photo modes be totally separate so you can set a shutter, aperture, all of that for your photo mode, and then set something totally different for video mode is fantastic. And was my one of my gripes about the A7 III is that if you change your shutter speed in photo mode and then you went back to the regular video modes, not the user presets, but the regular video mode, then your shutter speed would be the same as what you had set for your photo mode. Well, that now is changed on this and you can do basically whatever you want to do. Let's talk about the video specs. The fact that you can shoot 4K up to 120, basically anything in between, all with full face and eye detect autofocus, completely with audio, everything is incredible. Man, I love that. Being able to shoot in 422 10-bit is fantastic. Being able to use S-Log3 is really great. Now, all the video you're seeing here is all shot in the default Sony color profiles, no picture profile, nothing but just standard auto white balance across the board because I got this camera as I was driving out of town to go out into the wilderness for a couple of days to work on one of my family's cabins out there. So along that line, Sony has improved the color science of this camera, and it feels much more natural. It really is nice to be able to shoot with this. And for running gun shooters, if you don't feel like you want to color grade or you don't really want to push it, then shooting in all those modes in 8-bit at 420 in standard is fine, and it works really well. And it actually saves you a little bit of space on your SD cards, which is the only one of the small downsides about being able to shoot 4K at 120 in 10-bit is, good Lord, it eats up some SD card space really quickly. But it is incredible and beautiful, and it looks amazing. Now, being able to shoot that way with full audio capture and with full face and eye detect is incredibly awesome because you can film and decide whether or not you want to speed ramp something later on down the road or whether you want to leave it regular. Or it opens up so many doors for us as creators to be able to film and create content with this. And I'm sure we will see a ton of slow motion footage on YouTube soon as everybody starts getting these cameras. It is amazing to basically not have any limitations at all and be able to shoot this wonderful 4K footage that is super detailed and very nice with a small form factor body like this. The audio preamps in this sound good, they sound fine. They're really nothing spectacular, but they're not terrible either, which has always been my complaint with other cameras that I've had in the past. Not Sony cameras necessarily, but just other cameras, is the audio preamps, the mic preamps in these they were not good. But this is very good, and I used it a bunch with this, the D4 Duo, and I also used it with my D3 Pro if it was really windy, and the audio always came back really, really nice. The other thing I like being able to do with this particular mic is being able to switch it sideways like this and then basically capture stereo audio wherever I am and having kind of ambient sound, which is nice. I don't do that very often, but you can. And then of course it has the multi-interface hot shoe, so you can record up to 4 channels of audio into this camera, 4 separate channels, which is incredible if you're doing interview type stuff, things like that, that you could route that much clean audio into the camera and be able to work with it in post. Now, if you work with external recorders, no big deal, you work with external recorders, but being able to do most of that in camera is really nice for somebody like me who's a running gun shooter doing everything by myself. We've talked about high frame rates and shooting like that out outside and the light is great, but what excited me most about this camera is its ability to shoot in low light and being able to shoot slow motion in low light, being able to shoot 4K 120 in low light and not really have to worry about the ISO so much, where I've had to worry about that with other cameras. And it does really, really well. Even at incredibly high ISO, like this clip right here was shot HD 240 at something like 300 something thousand ISO or 200 something thousand ISO. I don't remember exactly, but it was extremely high. And yes, there's noise, but also I was in a pitch black cabin filming only this fire that was barely going after a few hours and it had kind of died down. And just the fact that you can even do that is incredible. And the fact that the camera grabs focus in almost no light at all. This clip right here was well after sunset. It was extremely dark, but as soon as I turned the camera on and turned toward my face, it immediately grabbed my face and even grabbed my eye and autofocused on it and nailed focus right off the bat, which is incredible. And this clip here, driving up the driveway, same thing. It grabbed focus outside in nearly pitch black conditions with only the headlights of the car, which is amazing. Another thing about the camera, especially for video shooters that you really appreciate, is the active steady shot. The fact that you can walk around, hand hold this camera, which is what I did everything in this video with because I forgot my tripod plate and I didn't have anything else to set it on. So I basically hand shot everything you're seeing in this video. But the active stabilization really does make a big difference for this camera in getting you usable footage at the end. You can even take it later and stabilize it using the Catalyst Browse software on your computer, and because it records gyro data into the metadata of the video, and that is super exciting for me, especially because I work with drones, and being able to capture the gyro data and stabilize it in post is very exciting to me. And you can see the difference here of how much the stabilization, I shot this, no stabilization in body, and then I shot it, or I stabilized this in post using Catalyst Browse software, and it makes a huge difference. And now we come to the photo quality. Now, I typically have shot photos with the A7 III, the A7R III, the A7R IV, depending on what the need was at the time. And I love shooting photos with those cameras because you get these massive high resolution stills that you can crop way in on, or that you can print out and blow up to a massive size and not lose any quality and not lose any detail. This is limited to 12 megapixels, which a lot of people have said is not big enough for photography. I disagree to a point, but I also agree in a sense. Like, if you're gonna shoot massive landscapes, if you're gonna shoot nature, things that you want a ton of detail in, a ton of resolution in, then yeah, you're gonna need a photo camera like that. But if your primary thing for shooting photos is for posting on websites, on social media, anything like that, the photos in this camera are really nice, and I really like the quality that they come out with. Not to mention the fact that you can shoot in insanely low light and still get a really nice, really clean, really usable image. The one thing that you need to watch out for is getting your framing right in the shot. So, because you don't have a lot of room to crop in post without starting to lose some quality. So you just have to make sure that you frame the shot up, that you get the shot set where you want it and how you want it before you take the picture and then edit it in post. And that brings me to the two things that I don't like about this camera, which is, it's nitpicky and it's a little bit stupid, but there are two things so far that I've found that I'm not a big fan of. One is you can't crop in using clear image zoom or APS-C mode because the sensor is 12.1 megapixels. You have no room to crop in without losing too much resolution and not being able to get a full pixel-to-pixel readout of a 4K image. And the only other thing that I've found that bugs me a little bit about this, and there's some workarounds that I'll get into when I do my setup and settings videos, but is you can't, at least so far, I haven't found a way to map the being able to change the audio recording levels to a button. On my A7 III, I had it mapped to this button right here. I can push it, change the audio recording levels, and adjust it really quickly. Now, there are some other ways to do that. Like I said, those will be coming. But for me, it's not a big deal because generally I use a mic with external preamp like the DDD3 Pro where I can adjust that as I'm going anyway, and I pretty much leave the audio recording settings in the camera wherever they are and just adjust everything else around them. I can safely say after 2 days of using this out in the wilderness of Alaska, like literally we hiked 18 miles to get where we were and to do the things we were doing out there, this camera has just changed the way I create. And I've heard other people say that before, and I just thought that was a great marketing term or a great marketing gimmick. But the fact that I don't really have to think about what the settings on this camera are, what the ISO is going to be if I want to shoot at higher frame rates, what the ISO settings are going to be, just any of the settings. Like I can just flip between 4K 24, 4K 60, 4K 120, flip into photo mode, and all of my settings are there and ready to go, and I don't really have to think about it or worry about it, has really made this something that has been game-changing for me over the last couple of days. It just is, it's blown my mind in now the ways that I can now create content and videos, both for YouTube, for here, and for clients that I'm working for. It's just an incredible tool. I have a feeling this is going to be on back order for a while. So if you haven't gotten your name in, you're probably going to want to do that now, and then forget that you back ordered it and just hope that it arrives in time for Christmas and you get a nice surprise at the doorstep one day. By the way, if you do want to do that, there are links in the description that obviously are affiliate links, and they help me out, but it's no extra cost to you. I put a link in the description that has a link to a few of the raw files that I've shot that you've seen in this video that you can go download and play around and check out yourself if you want to. I put together a playlist right here of my favorite settings, the way I set my camera up, and my favorite accessories to use with this camera. So you can click or tap there. I will see you in one of those videos. As always, ask me questions in the comments below or join my live stream Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Cheers.